Hi everybody, Joanna here. Today I'm going to be talking about The Lions of Al-Rassan by Guy Gavriel Kay. This was my introduction to Guy Gavriel Kay based on the recommendation of Jake Bishop, and this standalone includes action, adventure, romance, friendship, passion, poetry, religious conflict, and so much more. And I will try to unpack those things in a spoiler-free way in this video. And before I get into the setup, I want to go ahead and say that this is fantasy. As I mentioned, it is a standalone. And it's fantasy, I would say, because it is in a secondary world. It is not in our world, yet it closely resembles medieval Spain. And the three religions that are prominent in this story also resemble religions in our real world. And so, for that reason, I think that it does help ground you as a reader, knowing that there's certain inspiration from our real world, though there is a fair amount of world building, explaining the politics, explaining the religions. And there is a touch of magic, I would say, too. There's a character who's not a prominent character in the story, but there's a character who is able to psychically know where certain people are in the world. He's able to sense their auras and then visualize the locations where they are. So I would say that's possibly considered magical. And then the way medicine works in this world, I felt, especially towards the end, it felt like it bordered a little bit on magic in my mind, though it made sense in the world. And I think because the magic is minimal, and I think because some of it is inspired from things we understand in our world, I think that maybe those things weighed into why this is such a well executed standalone. And then at the heart of this, we have a multi POV story, but we have some primary characters we follow and grow attached to as readers as they are working through difficult decisions that they have to make with the conflicts that are arising. Now to talk about the setup of this story. So we have the land of Al-Rassan, which is divided into city-states after the death of the last caliph. And as a result, we have a bunch of warring petty kings in the land. And the dominant religion in Al-Rassan is the Asharite religion. And the Asharite religion is analogous to Islam. And we also have the Kindath religion, analogous to Judaism. And then up north, in what is formerly España, the dominant religion there is the Jaddite religion, which is analogous to Christianity. Now, the Jaddites up north are seen as a threat. There's a history of conquering and reclaiming and things like that between Al-Rassan and the Jaddites, but they don't seem to be able to get their stuff together, or they're perceived as not being too much of a threat since they are divided now. It's no longer a unified España. It's a divided one, what is formerly España. The Kindath and Al-Rassan, it seems like they are the most oppressed religion in this story. They have to pay taxes to the Asherites. They have to abide by certain laws. They work as laborers, and they just kind of coexist there. They have their own quarter in the city of Fazana. This is observed as being not so ideal, but better than if they had the alternative, better than if the Jaddites did take over, because the Asherites aren't really interested in converting people. They will allow people to be their own religion as long as they get their payment. They're fine with that. But the Jaddites, on the other hand, they see the Kindath as animals. They don't really see them as having any basic human rights at all. So for the Kindath, it's not ideal, but more ideal to be under Asherite rule than to be under Jaddite rule. So these are some of the complexities at play, and the world is much more complex as we learn about it through our characters. There are several things I want to say about these characters. So one is that these characters are interesting because they represent different religions in the world. So Kairan is Asherite, and then Jahane is Kindath, and then Alvar and Rodrigo are Jaddite from up north. And yet you see that they don't really have the same prejudice towards each other as some of the other areas of the world have towards each other. And I think part of that has to do with them being well traveled. But you see that in each of these religions, you do have the zealots. You do have the very evil, tyrannical people and horrible leaders. And Kay does not hold back from showing you what a tyrant looks like on the page. But at the same time, you also have people that understand, who see beyond that too. And that's definitely the case with our characters. And while I won't say that there wasn't any conflict based on those circumstances, I would say that there was connection that was formed. And what was beautiful about that is that these characters, they don't immediately trust each other. I didn't feel like they immediately connected. I did feel like there was an immediate chemistry with the characters. Even when we're first introduced to them individually, there's a lot of personality that comes off the page with each of them. And then when they intersect, there is a little bit of friction. There's a little bit of distrust. And slowly that distrust transforms into respect. And that respect slowly evolves into something deeper, to a deeper connection. And the progression of that throughout the story was so rich for me to read about. And of course, this all gets complicated with events happening in the world. But I also think it illustrates how, even though there are issues in the world at large with the religious conflicts, there are also other motivations that run deeper in human nature as well, or that run as deep in human nature as well. Maybe that's a way to say it. So, for example, there's a particular quote that Jehane says at one point, but although the three religions were all present here, it was obvious to her when quarrels arose, it had nothing to do with whether suns or moons or stars were worshipped. And I think that says something because we are ultimately seeing the setup of a holy war, but it's possibly the setup of a holy war in name only, meaning there are other kind of motivations at play for power. And this tests our characters to question what is worth aspiring towards and how does history shape those desires, those aspirations, or what we really believe in. And how do our loved ones, whether they are loved ones that we have come to know through friendship or loved ones who are our family, how do those affect what we aspire towards? And it's explored because at the heart of this is discernment. And with discernment, what I mean is that I think that it's really easy to see life as either or, good or bad, right or wrong, in certain dichotomies, but discernment is the ability to see the complexities there, to see layers, to see nuance, to see that there are other ways of seeing things than either or. But that doesn't necessarily make decision making all that more simple, right? Now, I want to talk a little bit about the structure of the story. It is divided into 18 chapters, 5 parts. But what was interesting about it is it felt like an organic structure. It did feel like we had the culmination of events at the end. We did build to something at the end, but it wasn't a straightforward path to get there. I felt like there were these small scale adventures and momentous events that happened that were thrilling, but more on a small scale, not on a grand epic scale. But they still made me invested in the characters. I think that they added to the character depth and growth and relationships throughout the story, that it helped build to what happens at the end and it made it more meaningful. So I did appreciate what felt like a very seamless, organic, different kind of structure. And I think that attention for some readers might wane a little bit as a result of that because we don't have this straightforward path to a certain goal at the end. It's more like a series of events that ultimately end up leading up to something, but you don't really see it all at once. And I also want to say that there is a great amount of foreshadowing or things that happen at the end that echo from the beginning of the book, even to the opening chapter, even to the prologue. And I loved the way Guy Gavriel Kay did that. And I also loved the way he added poetry into the story too at the perfect moments. Now to talk about the sex scenes in the book, because I know many people talk about sex scenes. And I would say the sex scenes, to me, I felt like they added to the dynamic between characters in the story. They felt to me like a natural progression of what occurred between certain characters. So for me, I didn't have any problems with them. I didn't feel like we lingered too long on the sex scenes personally. I know a couple of them were a little longer than others. There was one sex scene, maybe two, that might have been intended to be a little comical. I'm not sure, but they didn't really bother me. Like I said, I think that they added to the story. And the other thing I think that Guy Gavriel Kay does so well, he is excellent with his prose. As a result, I didn't feel like any of the sex scenes changed in tone, which is an issue I've had with some sex scenes in other books where some authors they suddenly change the tone completely when they're writing sex scenes and it feels out of place somehow. It never felt that way for me in his book. Even some of the ones that were a little comical, it felt like like I said, a natural progression, but also it just felt natural to the way he writes. So I didn't have any problem with the sex scenes personally. I do want to talk about his prose a little bit, and it's hard to talk about his prose without talking about everything I already talked about. But I do want to mention about how his prose was handling character work really well because this is a multi POV story, and I felt like every time he was in a certain character's perspective, I really felt like I was in their minds, like in their thought process about the world. Like when Jahane is reflecting on the different religions of the world and the way things are, I felt like I understood her perspective. I don't know, I just understood the world better through her perspective, but I understood her as a character through her perspective, the way he wrote her. The same with Rodrigo, the same with Alvar, and the same with two characters who were just, oh, they were kind of cruel characters. Specifically, two characters, Yazir and Galib. I felt like those two characters, they had such horrific views of the world, but I believed it. I believed their perspective. I believed that they believed what they believed. Because Kay writes in such a convincing way, they didn't feel like mustache twirling villains. And I think that's the beauty of Kay's prose. It didn't feel heavy for me, it didn't feel dense, but there was a sophistication to it that made all of these elements that work so beautifully in this story, love, romance, friendship. I felt like those things didn't feel like tropes to me. So we have what could be considered a ragtag group of friends or a found family, but it didn't feel like a trope. It felt real to me. I felt like I was in the lives of real live living legends, and this was their natural interaction with one another. So I think that says a lot about his prose, the way he was able to do that, and the way that he was able to capture setting, the way he was able to capture the nuance of so many different complex things happening in the story, and yet wrap up the story in a poetic way. But again, the reflections on history and aspirations, what we're aspiring towards, what's the more honorable cause to aspire towards, what we're doing for our families, our friends, our cycle of life, and also the question of who is my real enemy. So, overall, I hope that this will add interest to the book if you haven't read it. And if you have read it, please let me know. Either way, I welcome your comments in the comments section. Please say hi if you have nothing else to say. But thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.